Welcome, traveler. This is your quiet passage through the stars. Tonight, we'll gently drift through the silent dangers of space, not to startle you, but to remind you how strange and fragile the human body becomes out here. Let your eyes soften, let your breath slow. This video is meant to help you fall asleep. So close the hatch behind you and float with me through the dark. Chapter 1. Your spine stretches and you get taller, but it hurts. In the gentle, soundless ballet of space, your body begins to shift. Not suddenly, and not in ways that are always obvious. But change comes, quiet and persistent. And one of the first transformations, one of the most reliable hallmarks of life beyond gravity, is this: you get taller. Most astronauts experience a noticeable increase in height, about 2 to 5 centimeters, within days of arriving in orbit. It's as though the body, freed from the weight of the world, begins to unfold. But while this may sound like a gift from the cosmos, it's not without consequence. That gentle stretch, that extra inch or two, often arrives hand in hand with a deep, persistent discomfort. Your spine grows longer, but in doing so, it starts to ache. Let's explore why this happens. On Earth, gravity compresses the spine constantly. The human vertebral column is a delicate stack of 33 vertebrae separated by intervertebral discs, small, cartilaginous pads that cushion and support the bones of your back. These discs are slightly elastic and filled with fluid, absorbing shock and helping the spine flex and move. Under gravity's pressure, these discs are compressed, especially while sitting or standing. This compression affects your daily height more than you might realize. You're typically tallest when you wake up in the morning, and by the evening, you're slightly shorter, up to 1 to 2 centimeters less, thanks to the subtle but continuous squashing of your spine over the course of the day. In space, however, that pressure disappears. In microgravity, your vertebral discs are no longer compressed from above. They absorb more fluid and begin to expand, creating more space between each vertebra. The normal curvature of the spine also starts to flatten slightly, particularly in the lower back and neck. Your body isn't just relaxing, it's physically reconfiguring its foundational structure. But this elongation comes at a price. Astronauts frequently report lower back pain during the first few days or weeks of spaceflight. It's not sharp or sudden, but deep and lingering, the kind of ache that suggests the body is struggling to adjust. Why the pain? It's likely due to a mismatch between bone and muscle. On Earth, muscles in your core and back constantly engage to hold your spine upright against gravity. In space, those same muscles begin to atrophy quickly, even with exercise. Meanwhile, the spine itself is expanding, pushing against soft tissue and triggering discomfort in joints and nerves. NASA has studied this extensively. Spinal pain in space is so common that it has a name: space adaptation back pain. A 2011 survey found that over half of astronauts reported moderate to severe back pain during their missions. The discomfort usually subsides after a few days, but in some cases it lingers or re-emerges upon return to Earth. And here's where things get riskier. Once astronauts return to gravity, their newly lengthened spines are suddenly compressed again, but the supporting muscles are weakened from disuse. This can lead to instability, poor posture, and a significantly increased risk of spinal injuries. In fact, astronauts are over 4 times more likely to suffer a herniated disc than the general population after returning from long-duration spaceflight. A herniated disc occurs when one of those jelly-like intervertebral cushions bulges or bursts, pressing against the spinal cord or nearby nerves. It can cause shooting pain, numbness, and long-term disability. For a returning astronaut, someone already coping with weakened muscles, balance issues, and readaptation stress, a herniated disc is a serious complication. These aren't just hypothetical risks. One astronaut, after a 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station, ISS, developed such severe lumbar disc issues that they required surgical repair. Another astronaut described difficulty walking after landing, not due to balance, but because of sharp nerve pain caused by spinal compression. NASA now routinely screens astronauts for spinal health before and after flight, tracking their disc thickness, alignment, and flexibility through MRI and ultrasound imaging. What's more, space agencies are trying to get ahead of the problem by prescribing rigorous in-flight exercise routines. Astronauts aboard the ISS spend around 2 hours each day exercising. The Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, ARED, for example, simulates weightlifting using vacuum cylinders and piston-driven resistance. Astronauts also use stationary bikes, treadmills with harnesses, and core strengthening protocols to try and counteract the effects of microgravity on their spines and muscles. But exercise can only go so far. Consider long-term missions, such as a round trip to Mars. That journey would expose astronauts to microgravity for 9 months en route, then again for another 9 months on the return. Even if artificial gravity solutions are developed, like rotating habitats or centrifuges, they may not replicate the full, consistent gravitational force of Earth across all axes of the body. Bone and muscle degeneration might still occur, including in the spine, which raises an unnerving question. What if the human spine is simply not made for space? One of the most fascinating and sobering studies on this subject involved astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent 340 days aboard the ISS. Upon return, Kelly was nearly 5 centimeters taller than when he left. His height gain faded after a few days, but the musculoskeletal stress and spinal adaptation lingered. MRI scans showed signs of spinal disc thinning and changes to posture. The mission, while historic, highlighted just how profound and perhaps irreversible some bodily changes can be. Another study from Japan's JAXA space agency found that lumbar disc swelling in astronauts was not only consistent across participants but predictive of post-mission back issues. In simulated microgravity environments on Earth, such as head-down tilt bed rest, similar effects have been observed, pointing to a shared physiological response to weightlessness that might not be easily undone. There's another subtle concern: proprioception. Proprioception is your body's innate sense of position and movement. It tells you where your limbs are, how fast you're moving, and whether you're upright or tilted, even with your eyes closed. Much of this system depends on sensory feedback from your joints, muscles, and yes, your spine. When your spine elongates and your muscles weaken, your sense of bodily orientation begins to deteriorate. This can lead to balance problems, clumsiness, and a general feeling of disconnection from your body. Astronauts describe this as floating disorientation. The body is adrift not just physically, but sensorially. Another concern emerging from extended time in space is spinal ligament laxity. Without the need to support weight, the ligaments that stabilize the spine may begin to stretch and lose tension, resulting in subtle spinal instability. This could further complicate posture and movement upon return to Earth. In some studies, researchers have also detected minor shifts in vertebral alignment, suggesting that gravity may play a vital role in preserving the spine's structural integrity. To further understand and mitigate these effects, space agencies have turned to analogs like underwater training and dry immersion experiments, where subjects are partially submerged for extended periods to simulate fluid shifts and microgravity effects. These studies help scientists isolate spinal stress responses and refine in-flight countermeasures. For example, wearable spinal loading suits, like the Russian Penguin suit and newer gravity loading countermeasure suits, GLCS, aim to replicate axial load on the spine using elastic resistance. Though imperfect, these approaches represent one of the best hopes we have for preserving spinal health in the absence of gravity. And in the quiet of orbit, there is no sound of bones growing, no alarm for back pain, no signal that something deep within you is changing forever. It just happens, day by day, stretch by stretch, until you are no longer the same shape you were. Philosophically, it's a beautiful kind of metaphor. Gravity, that quiet burden we never question, is the sculptor of our bodies. Remove it, and we unravel in slow, subtle ways. Not with a bang, but with a groan. The spine is more than a stack of bones. It's our axis, physically and symbolically. It centers us. It holds the nerves that carry thought into motion, sensation into memory. And when the spine is tampered with, even gently, something essential feels unmoored. As we dream of Mars, of Europa, of life among the stars, we must ask ourselves not only what technology can take us there, but what biology can survive the trip. Because space is not just out there. It's in here too, pressing against your nerves, lengthening your spine, and asking quietly, are you still human when even your skeleton changes shape? Chapter 2. Your eyes might go blind from the inside out. In the darkness of space, your eyes are not safe. It's easy to think that without sunlight or pollution, your vision would improve out there. The stars are clearer. There's no atmosphere to distort the light. But this is one of space's cruelest illusions, because quietly and persistently, microgravity can turn your own body against your sight. This condition is known as SANS, Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, and it affects over 60% of astronauts who stay in space for extended periods. What begins as mild visual blurring can evolve into swelling of the optic nerve, flattening of the eyeball, and lasting changes in vision. In some cases, these changes don't go away. To understand how this happens, we need to begin with the delicate plumbing of your body, particularly how fluids move when gravity is no longer pulling them downward. On Earth, gravity acts as a quiet but consistent force that distributes fluids throughout your body. Your blood, lymph, and interstitial fluids are all drawn toward your lower body, balanced by the pressure from your heart and veins. Your face stays relatively slim, your limbs hold a predictable pressure, and your brain sits comfortably in its watery cushion. But in space, that balance breaks. As soon as you enter microgravity, your bodily fluids begin to shift upward, pulled not by any new force, but freed from Earth's persistent tug. The result is a puffy face effect that astronauts often joke about, but the consequences go much deeper. Fluid collects in the head, filling the tissues of the face and scalp, and slowly pressing on the soft membranes inside the skull. This increased pressure, called intracranial pressure, subtly begins to push against the back of the eye. Over time, the optic nerve head swells, a condition known as optic disc edema. The globe of the eye, normally slightly rounded, starts to flatten from behind, and the changes begin. Astronauts describe it as a creeping blurriness. At first, it's just a minor nuisance, a need to squint, or a loss of sharpness in distant objects. But for some, it progresses. Vision becomes distorted. Nearsightedness develops or worsens. And in long-duration missions, these effects can persist long after re-entry. Studies show that 20 to 29% of astronauts on long flights report persistent changes to their vision, even after returning to Earth. Some even require permanent changes to their prescriptions. Glasses used in orbit are often labeled as space anticipation lenses, adaptive prescriptions meant to accommodate the shift astronauts expect to experience. And what's most chilling? We still don't fully understand why this happens. The exact mechanism of SANS remains under investigation. One leading theory is that the glymphatic system, a waste-clearing system in the brain that drains cerebrospinal fluid, becomes impaired in microgravity. Normally, this fluid drains downward through spinal channels. But in space, the drainage slows or halts, building pressure around the optic nerve and within the skull. Imagine this: your cerebrospinal fluid, normally clear, gentle, and flowing, becoming a stagnant pool behind your eyes. Not violently, not all at once, but hour by hour, it presses forward, invisible and quiet. and your sight begins to change. There's also evidence that the shape of the eye itself is permanently affected. Optical coherence tomography (OCT) scans taken before and after missions show consistent structural changes. The posterior globe flattens, the retina wrinkles and choroidal folds, small ripples in the vascular layer of the eye, appear and sometimes persist. And unlike other bodily changes in space, vision degradation seems resistant to countermeasures. Spinal stretching can be fought with resistance exercise. Bone loss can be slowed with medication. But how do you simulate gravity inside the skull? How do you restore fluid balance in an environment where there is no down? NASA has begun experimenting with devices like the Lower Body Negative Pressure (LBNP) chamber. Essentially, a vacuum chamber for the legs that pulls fluids back toward the lower body. Early trials show promise, with some astronauts reporting a temporary relief from symptoms during LBNP sessions. But so far, no method has been able to halt the progression of SANS entirely, and this raises serious concerns for future missions. A journey to Mars could take 9 months each way. Add surface operations and return windows, and astronauts might spend over 3 years outside Earth's gravity well. If visual degradation continues steadily over that time, what happens if a crew member begins to go blind mid-mission? What if navigation screens become unreadable, or tool calibration becomes impossible? In the vast silence of space where every instrument matters, losing your sight is more than inconvenient. It's potentially fatal. Some researchers have pointed out that the effects of SANS mimic those seen in patients with idiopathic intracranial hypertension, IIH, a condition in which cerebrospinal fluid builds up for unknown reasons. Patients with IIH often report headaches, visual disturbances, and ringing in the ears. Sound familiar? And there's another layer to this, perhaps more subtle, more existential. Vision is our most dominant sense. We rely on it not just for survival, but for orientation, identity, connection. To look out the window of a spacecraft and see Earth shrinking into a blue dot is not just a scientific observation, it's a spiritual one. But SANS quietly erodes that clarity. Your eyes, the tools through which you witness the majesty of the cosmos, begin to fog from within. It's a strange irony. The farther you go from Earth, the more the universe opens up, and the less clearly you can see it. Astronauts speak of this in different ways. Some grow philosophical about it, others find it disquieting. One veteran astronaut described looking at the stars during a mission, realizing they appeared dimmer than remembered. "Not the stars," he said, "me." And still, the syndrome doesn't strike everyone equally. Genetic factors are now being explored. Certain gene expressions related to B vitamin metabolism, particularly those involving folate and homocysteine pathways, may predispose astronauts to developing SANS. Elevated levels of homocysteine are already associated with vascular problems and nerve damage on Earth. In space, these small differences might become amplified. There are also questions about body type, fluid volume, and even age. Could younger astronauts be at lower risk? Could pre-flight training reduce the incidence? We don't know yet. Research continues. But in the meantime, NASA is developing protocols to detect early signs of SANS mid-flight, including portable ultrasound and optical scanners that can monitor swelling of the optic nerve and changes in eye shape. It's a race between vision loss and innovation, between degradation and understanding. And there's one more thing worth considering, something haunting. In the depths of space far from Earth, there is no up, no sunrise or sunset, no horizon line to orient your gaze. Without gravity and reference points, the very act of looking changes. Astronauts report losing their innate sense of direction, not just in motion but in perception. A sense that your body has rotated, even when still. A feeling that the stars are both above you and below you, all at once. Now imagine that your eyes, already compromised, are the only interface you have with this surreal world, and they are dimming. It's not dramatic like blindness in the movies. It's not a shudder or a blackout. It's blur, a slow smudging of reality, a soft corruption of your most trusted sense. You float through the void. The stars, once sharp, soften. Letters on the screen distort. Your own reflection bends slightly in the glass. And all the while, behind your eyes, the pressure builds. This is what it means to go blind from the inside out. Not in panic, not in violence, but gently, like a dream you can't quite wake from. The universe fades, not because it changed, but because you did. And perhaps that's the most sobering truth. In space, it's not always the environment that harms you. It's the way your body responds to freedom from Earth. Sight, like balance, like bone density, is something you didn't know you owed to gravity until it began to slip away. But we adapt, we study, we invent, and even in darkness, the human mind seeks light. One day, perhaps, we'll design ships that spin, cabins that breathe, suits that shield, and systems that circulate. One day, we may conquer the slow blindness that haunts the edge of our reach. Until then, astronauts will continue to float above us, brave, brilliant, and just slightly blurred. Chapter 3. Your bones begin to dissolve. In the silence of space, far from the ground that once held you up, something begins to slip away inside you. You may not feel it at first. There is no sharp pain, no sudden signal. You're floating after all, free from the downward pull of gravity, no longer needing your legs to hold you, your spine to brace you, your arms to push against anything heavier than the whisper-light air around you. And so, quietly, without complaint, your bones begin to dissolve. This isn't metaphor, it's biology. The process is known as spaceflight osteopenia, a form of accelerated bone loss caused by prolonged exposure to microgravity. On Earth, your bones are constantly in a state of renewal. Cells called osteoclasts break down old bone tissue, while osteoblasts build new material to replace it. This dynamic balance, known as bone remodeling, keeps your skeleton strong and responsive to your body's needs. But that balance depends on stress. Not emotional stress, but mechanical stress. The push and pull of muscle and gravity acting on bone. Every time you walk, jump, or lift something on Earth, you're triggering signals that tell your bones, stay strong, reinforce here, grow denser. Remove that stress, and your bones stop listening. In microgravity, there is no weight bearing. Your legs don't support your mass. Your spine doesn't compress. Your muscles work less, and without the usual strain to resist, your bones begin to lose density rapidly. Studies have shown that astronauts can lose 1 to 2% of bone mass per month while in space. In comparison, postmenopausal women with osteoporosis lose that much in an entire year. Worse still, not all bone mass is equal. The most affected areas are the trabecular bones, the spongy, porous interiors found in places like the femur, thigh bone, pelvis, vertebrae, and hips. These bones have a higher surface area and remodel more quickly, making them especially vulnerable to resorption in microgravity. Over time, their inner latticework becomes thinner and more brittle, like ancient coral left to bleach in the sun. You are, in effect, slowly becoming hollow. This loss is not merely cosmetic or theoretical. It carries consequences. Reduced bone mass increases the risk of fractures, both in space and upon return to Earth. Imagine an astronaut slipping during landing recovery or sustaining a small impact while suiting up on Mars. Bones weakened by months of inactivity may break under stress that would once have been harmless. And in the harsh, isolated environment of deep space, a fracture isn't just an injury, it's a potential mission-ending event. But there's more to this quiet dissolution. When bones break down, calcium is released into the bloodstream. That calcium, no longer locked safely within your skeleton, can cause a host of new problems. Elevated blood calcium levels, or hypercalcemia, can lead to kidney stones, impaired heart function, and neurological symptoms like confusion or weakness. NASA has documented cases of astronauts excreting significantly increased levels of calcium in their urine during long-duration flights. The kidneys, strained by this excess, must work harder to maintain balance, and over time, the risk of developing renal calculi, spaceborne kidney stones, becomes very real. Imagine floating in microgravity, unable to find rest, racked with the deep pulsing pain of a stone moving through your urinary tract, with no emergency room, no morphine drip, and no quick exit back to Earth. The irony here is stark. In the place where you weigh nothing, you begin to crumble under your own absence. So what can be done? NASA and other space agencies have been experimenting with countermeasures for decades. Weight-bearing exercise is the most common prescription. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station use devices like the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, ARED, to simulate lifting weights. They perform daily routines targeting major muscle groups and bones, especially in the legs and hips. Resistance bands, harness treadmills, and even bungee-assisted squats are part of the in-flight regimen. And it works, to a degree. Exercise can slow bone loss, but it doesn't stop it entirely. Even the most compliant astronauts return to Earth with measurable reductions in bone mineral density. The rebuilding process can take months or years, and in some cases, full recovery may never occur. The microarchitecture of the bone, its inner strength, might be permanently altered. This has sparked research into pharmaceutical solutions. Bisphosphonates, the same drugs used to treat osteoporosis on Earth, have been tested in astronauts. These compounds slow the activity of osteoclasts, reducing bone resorption. In a Japanese study aboard the ISS, astronauts who took bisphosphonates in combination with exercise experienced significantly less bone loss than those who exercised alone. But long-term use of these medications carries its own risks, including gastrointestinal issues and rare complications like osteonecrosis of the jaw. Then there's the question of radiation. Cosmic radiation, ever present outside Earth's protective magnetic field, may contribute to bone degradation in a way that has nothing to do with gravity. High-energy particles can damage bone marrow, alter cellular activity, and further accelerate the decline in skeletal health. So even if we build rotating habitats to mimic gravity, bone loss might persist due to the environment itself. We are learning slowly that keeping bones strong in space is not a single battle, but a layered war against multiple fronts. And perhaps most unsettling of all is the philosophical turn this invites. Bones are the silent framework of the self. You don't see them, you rarely think about them, but they are always there, holding you together, shaping your movement, defining your form. They are, in many ways, the oldest part of you. By the time you're an adult, nearly all the cells in your body have turned over, skin, blood, muscle, but your bones remain, not entirely unchanged, but enduring. To lose them, then, is to lose something ancestral, foundational, a quiet fading of structure into memory. In one interview, a returning astronaut described standing in their shower weeks after landing and feeling their legs tremble under their own weight. It was like waking up in someone else's body, they said. I was taller, weaker. My skeleton felt foreign. They weren't being poetic. They were describing real, measurable change. Some astronauts are never quite the same. And as we plan missions lasting not just months but years, to the moon, to Mars, to the asteroids beyond, we must ask what will be left of the human frame when it is stretched by time, pressure, and absence. Could we evolve? Would our descendants, born and raised in microgravity, develop a new kind of body? Thinner bones, longer limbs, narrower hips, the beginnings of a post-terrestrial physiology? Science fiction has long imagined this. The tall, frail Martian human, adapted to low gravity, unable to return to Earth. But what if it's not fiction? What if every hour in orbit is a small rehearsal for a skeletal future we cannot undo? For now, the focus remains on preservation, monitoring, intervention. Astronauts have their bone density measured before and after flight, using dual energy X-ray absorptiometry DEXA scans. Their calcium levels are tracked, their exercise is documented, their diets are precisely engineered. Every step is a strategy to retain what Earth gave them. But deep down they know, in space, bones are borrowed time. And that knowledge, quiet, creeping, inescapable, adds another weight to the already heavy question of human space travel. We can send machines into the void indefinitely. We can orbit satellites and drive rovers. But to send flesh, to send blood and bone, is to enter a contract with change. The longer we stay aloft, the more we become, not broken, but unbuilt. And so you float 400 kilometers above Earth, strong in spirit but subtly softening. Each sunrise, 16 a day in orbit, passes without ceremony. And your skeleton, that ancient scaffolding, slowly yields to the vastness that surrounds you. Not with violence, not with a snap, but like salt in warm water, dissolving grain by grain into the invisible. Chapter 4. Your blood starts to float, and that's not a good thing. In the deep, dreamlike drift of space, your body begins to forget where things belong. Not metaphorically, literally. Fluids rise, pressure changes, organs shift, and quietly your blood, that warm, vital river within you, stops flowing the way it used to. It starts to float. And while that may sound poetic, in space, it's the start of something dangerous. Here on Earth, gravity is the great organizer. It pulls your blood downward, pulling in your legs when you stand, stretching your veins, challenging your heart to push against it. Your circulatory system evolved around this constant pressure, a balance of vertical resistance and muscular assistance. Valves open and close, vessels expand and contract, and your body becomes a living column of upward force. But in orbit, that column collapses. When gravity is removed, there's no longer a pull directing your blood toward your feet. It redistributes evenly but unevenly, upward toward your chest, neck, and head. The result is a phenomenon called cephalad fluid shift, a noticeable migration of fluids from the lower body to the upper. You'll feel it almost immediately. Your face puffs up, your sinuses clog, your neck stiffens. You look in the mirror and see someone new, fuller, rounder, vaguely congested. Astronauts sometimes call it the moon face. It's harmless at first glance, but it's only the beginning. With this shift, your heart, suddenly relieved of its usual uphill battle, becomes confused. It detects more blood than it's used to in the upper body and assumes you're fluid overloaded. In response, it starts to excrete water and salt through the kidneys. Within the first few days of spaceflight, you begin to urinate more and lose plasma volume. Your blood thickens slightly, and your overall circulating volume drops. This process, called spaceflight-induced hypovolemia, becomes a new normal. But your body doesn't know this normal is temporary, so it starts to adapt. Your red blood cells, the cells that carry oxygen, begin to die off at a faster rate. This phenomenon is known as space anemia, and it's not a rare side effect. It happens in virtually all astronauts during long-duration spaceflight. For decades, doctors assumed this was a minor and reversible adaptation. But recent research, particularly from a 2022 Canadian Space Agency study, has revealed something more serious. Using mass spectrometry, scientists measured carbon monoxide levels in astronauts' breath, a byproduct of red blood cell breakdown, and discovered that space travelers were destroying 54% more red blood cells than on Earth. The body was actively dismantling its oxygen carriers, even when oxygen wasn't in short supply. Why? The precise mechanism remains uncertain. One hypothesis suggests the spleen and liver, responsible for filtering out aging or damaged red cells, respond to altered blood flow and pressure with increased activity. Another theory points to radiation exposure as a potential contributor to cellular fragility. Whatever the cause, the result is clear. In microgravity, your blood becomes less efficient at carrying oxygen, and that leads to fatigue, lightheadedness, and difficulty performing physically demanding tasks. Some astronauts describe feeling washed out or foggy during high exertion moments. In emergencies, this could be catastrophic, but the problem deepens when you return home. Once back on Earth, your body is still acclimated to space. Your blood volume is reduced. Your heart has remodeled itself to pump in low-resistance conditions. Your reflexes for maintaining pressure, such as vasoconstriction and baroreceptor signaling, are dulled. The result? Orthostatic intolerance. This is a fancy way of saying when you stand up, you faint. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it's common. After landing, astronauts often undergo tilt table tests to assess their response to posture changes. Many experience dizziness, blurred vision, or even loss of consciousness when simply moving from lying to standing. Their bodies, so good at floating, have forgotten how to rise. And this isn't the only risk. Let's return to the blood itself. In 2019, a NASA-funded ultrasound study made a startling discovery. Researchers found that in a small but significant number of astronauts, blood was flowing backward in the jugular vein, the large vessel that drains blood from the head. In one case, a blood clot. A deep vein thrombosis was discovered. A blood clot in space is more than a medical curiosity. It's a ticking time bomb. On Earth, a clot in a deep vein can break off and travel to the lungs, causing a pulmonary embolism, a potentially fatal event. In space, where blood flow is altered, clot dynamics may change. What forms in one vessel could travel unpredictably. With limited treatment options and no trauma surgery suites in orbit, managing a clot becomes an exercise in improvisation and hope. The affected astronaut was treated with anticoagulants and monitored remotely, but the episode left an unsettling question in its wake. How many clots are we not detecting? After all, symptoms like swelling, pain, and discoloration are harder to notice in a zero-gravity environment. Even imaging is more difficult. And while we're discussing oxygen transport, consider this. Spaceflight also affects capillary density and the shape of red blood cells. Some cells become more spherical and less flexible, impairing their ability to squeeze through the tiniest vessels. Over time, tissue oxygenation may decline. Muscles weaken. Healing slows. Your blood, that once tireless courier of life, becomes sluggish, directionless, confused. And beyond the immediate effects, there are long-term concerns. Could repeated missions lead to cumulative vascular damage? Are astronauts at higher risk of stroke or heart disease later in life? Could subtle changes in blood chemistry trigger autoimmune responses, or even contribute to cognitive decline? We don't yet know, but we're asking. To counteract these risks, astronauts now follow strict hydration and salt protocols before re-entry, helping restore blood volume and support pressure reflexes. Compression garments, like the Russian Kentaur suit, are worn during landing to prevent blood from pooling in the legs. In-flight ultrasound devices monitor venous flow, and pharmaceutical research is exploring clot prevention in altered circulatory environments. And yet, we still don't have a full solution. Because the real issue isn't just blood flow, it's disorientation. Your circulatory system is built on orientation, the knowledge of what is up and what is down. When gravity disappears, so too does that map. Pressure gradients vanish, feedback loops falter, hormones act inappropriately, and slowly the whole machine rewrites itself. In space, your blood floats, but that floating isn't freedom, it's confusion. It's the loss of tension, the collapse of invisible scaffolding. And in its place, something quieter takes root, the slow drift toward imbalance. And maybe that imbalance isn't just physical. There's something deeply symbolic about blood losing its way. It's not just a fluid, it's the carrier of memory, of antibodies, of oxygen, of heat. It's what flushes your cheeks when you're embarrassed, warms your fingers in the cold, feeds your brain when you think. To imagine it directionless is to imagine yourself unmoored. One astronaut, interviewed after a long-duration flight, said this: "I remember trying to feel my pulse in space just out of curiosity, and it felt quieter. less urgent, as if my body had paused something it didn't need anymore. I didn't realize until I came back how much I'd missed the gravity in my veins. In that sentence lies something profound. Blood is meant to move with purpose, to fall, to rise, to circle. In space, that circle bends, not always dangerously, but undeniably. So the next time you look up at the stars and dream of flying, remember this: your blood, that deep red thread of life, does not dream of flight. It dreams of falling, of rivers flowing downhill, of hearts pumping upward, of balance held delicately against the pull of earth. Take that away, and the tide turns inward, softly, silently, until your own circulation becomes the first part of you to forget the shape of home. Chapter 5. You start losing muscle even when you exercise. The human body is built for gravity. Muscles contract to lift against it, stretch to absorb its pull, and rest only when its demands are momentarily lifted. Under Earth's conditions, muscles constantly engage in micro-adjustments just to maintain posture or stand still. The act of living, walking, climbing, lifting, even breathing, is a daily resistance training session built into our biology. But in the weightlessness of space, that natural resistance vanishes. And with it, the foundation of muscle maintenance begins to erode. This is not just a matter of aesthetics or strength. It is a fundamental problem for long-duration spaceflight. Despite exercising for up to 2 hours each day aboard the International Space Station ISS, astronauts still experience significant muscle loss, and the implications extend far beyond reduced performance. Muscle deterioration can affect metabolism, cardiovascular health, postural control, bone integrity, and the ability to function safely on planetary surfaces or upon return to Earth. Microgravity-induced muscle loss is known as spaceflight-induced muscle atrophy. The phenomenon affects both skeletal muscle mass and muscle fiber function, and it begins within days of entering a microgravity environment. On Earth, skeletal muscles respond to mechanical loading. The mechanical stress applied to muscles during weight-bearing activity stimulates the release of growth factors, activates satellite cells, muscle stem cells, and supports protein synthesis, all of which preserve muscle mass and strength. In the absence of this stimulus, the balance between muscle protein synthesis and degradation tips sharply in favor of breakdown. During spaceflight, this manifests most severely in the anti-gravity muscles, those used most to counter Earth's pull. The calf muscles, gastrocnemius and soleus, quadriceps, gluteals, and spinal extensors are particularly vulnerable. Without the regular task of supporting the body against gravity, these muscles rapidly begin to shrink and weaken. Studies have shown that astronauts can lose between 10% and 20% of muscle mass in the lower limbs during missions as short as 5 to 11 days. During long-duration missions, 6 months or more, losses can be even more significant. One study using MRI scans showed a 29% reduction in lower limb muscle volume in some crew members after 180 days aboard the ISS. This muscle wasting is accompanied by a measurable decrease in muscle strength. Isokinetic dynamometry, a method used to assess muscle force, often shows reductions in knee extensor and plantar flexor strength post-flight. These strength losses can persist for weeks or months after return, depending on the countermeasures employed during the mission and the individual's pre-flight condition. Even more concerning is that muscle quality declines in addition to quantity. Biopsies of muscle tissue collected before and after missions have revealed a shift in muscle fiber type, from slow twitch type 1 oxidative fibers, which are fatigue-resistant and used for posture, to fast twitch type 2 glycolytic fibers, which fatigue more easily. This shift reduces endurance and stability, further compounding the deconditioning effect. Moreover, mitochondrial function in muscle cells appears to decline during spaceflight. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, responsible for generating ATP, the energy currency used during muscle contraction. Impairments in mitochondrial density and efficiency reduce exercise capacity and delay recovery after activity. Emerging data suggests that oxidative stress and altered gene expression related to mitochondrial biogenesis contribute to this problem. Despite all this, astronauts are not sedentary in space. In fact, they follow some of the most rigorous and carefully designed exercise protocols of any population on Earth. Aboard the ISS, crew members are scheduled for roughly 2 hours of exercise per day, 6 days a week. This typically includes resistive exercise on the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, ARED, which uses vacuum cylinders and flywheel mechanisms to simulate weightlifting. Astronauts can perform squats, deadlifts, heel raises, bench presses, and other compound movements targeting large muscle groups. Aerobic exercise, typically using a stationary bicycle or the T2 treadmill, both of which are equipped with harnesses and straps to secure the astronaut and provide axial loading during exercise. Flexibility and core training, often incorporated during or after resistive work to maintain posture, range of motion, and trunk stability. These measures are effective at reducing, but not eliminating, muscle loss. A 2010 study published in Journal of Applied Physiology showed that astronauts who used ARED experienced only modest losses in leg muscle mass and strength compared to those using earlier resistance systems. However, the device does not fully replicate Earth gravity, and differences in exercise compliance, technique, and loading can lead to variable results. Researchers are exploring several additional countermeasures to enhance muscle preservation. Neuromuscular electrical stimulation, NMES. This technique involves applying electrical impulses to muscle groups to stimulate contractions, even in the absence of voluntary movement. NMES has been used on Earth for patients in rehabilitation and is being evaluated for space use as a passive complement to physical training. Pharmacologic interventions. Anabolic agents such as selective androgen receptor modulators, SARMs, or myostatin inhibitors have been proposed to help preserve or increase muscle mass in microgravity. However, their long-term safety profile in healthy astronauts remains uncertain, and no such drugs are currently approved for flight use. Nutritional support. Adequate protein intake, generally 1.2 to 1.5 gram/kilogram day, is vital to muscle maintenance. NASA carefully regulates astronaut diets to ensure sufficient amino acid availability. Supplementation with branched-chain amino acids, BCAAs, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin D may also support muscle metabolism, although results have been mixed. Artificial gravity, perhaps the most promising long-term solution. Short-radius centrifuges could generate mechanical loading by mimicking gravity through centrifugal force. Initial experiments have shown improved muscle and cardiovascular markers, but full-scale implementation remains years away. It's worth noting that muscle loss in space is not uniform across all individuals. Genetic predisposition, pre-flight fitness level, adherence to exercise protocols, and even sex hormones may influence outcomes. Some astronauts return to Earth with minimal changes, while others require extensive rehabilitation. Post-mission recovery itself is a medically significant period. Upon return, astronauts often report fatigue, unsteadiness, and decreased physical stamina. Muscle mass and function generally begin to return within 1 to 3 months, but in some cases, especially after longer missions, full recovery may take 6 months or more. Rehabilitation includes monitored strength and endurance training, cardiovascular conditioning, flexibility work, and often physiotherapy. NASA and ESA use DEXA scans, ultrasound imaging, and force dynamometry to track muscle restoration. Longitudinal studies show that repeated missions may lead to a plateau in muscle recovery or greater baseline loss with each flight, indicating a cumulative effect. In the context of future missions to the Moon or Mars, muscle atrophy presents an even more critical concern. Landing on another planetary surface will require astronauts to perform physically demanding tasks, lifting equipment, walking across uneven terrain, operating in reduced but present gravity, or 0.16 grams on the Moon or 0.38 grams on Mars. Arriving in a deconditioned state could endanger both individual safety and mission success. Therefore, preserving muscle mass in transit is not simply a matter of performance, it is a prerequisite for planetary operation. Current exploration roadmaps prioritize integrating more effective resistive equipment into spacecraft design, investigating hybrid exercise protocols, e.g., resistance combined with vibration, and validating space-ready forms of high-intensity interval training, EDIT. Advanced biometric tracking systems will also allow real-time monitoring of muscle performance during future deep space missions. As more is learned, the vision of a resilient, well-conditioned human capable of long-term extraterrestrial activity becomes more plausible. But the challenge remains substantial. Space, by its very nature, removes the very force our bodies were built to resist. And in doing so, it reveals just how quickly muscle, once idle, begins to vanish. Though exercise in orbit is extensive and evolving, the stark truth remains. You start losing muscle, even when you exercise. Chapter 6. Your immune system stops working properly. On Earth, your immune system is always working, even when you're not aware of it. Quietly patrolling, repairing, remembering. It's a silent force that evolved under pressure. Gravity, sunlight, bacteria, viruses, and every encounter your ancestors had with a hostile world. Over millions of years, it became your internal shield, trained to respond with precision and restraint. But when you leave Earth, when you rise into orbit and float beyond the natural boundaries of your species, this invisible guardian starts to falter. In space, your immune system doesn't behave as it should, and the further you go, the less it seems to remember what it was made to protect. Within days of arriving in microgravity, astronauts experience changes in the function, distribution, and regulation of nearly every component of the immune system. From white blood cells to signaling molecules, from inflammation markers to dormant viruses buried deep within their DNA. The result is not full immunosuppression, nor a complete immune overreaction. It is something stranger, a quiet confusion. An immune system that is both overactive and underprepared. Let's begin with the basics. Your immune system operates through two major branches. Innate immunity, the fast, non-specific defense system that includes macrophages, neutrophils, and natural killer NK cells. And adaptive immunity, a slower but more precise system involving T cells and B cells that learn and remember specific pathogens. Both systems are affected by spaceflight. In microgravity, T-cell function is significantly impaired. T-cells, which are critical for identifying infected or malignant cells, become less responsive. Their proliferation slows. Their ability to signal and coordinate attacks is diminished. Studies of blood samples taken before and after spaceflight show a reduced expression of key surface proteins like CD69 and CD25. Molecules that help initiate immune responses. At the same time, natural killer NK cell activity drops. NK cells are part of the body's innate immune system, responsible for identifying and eliminating virus-infected cells and early tumors. In space, their cytotoxic activity, their ability to kill, decreases significantly. This makes the body more vulnerable to latent viral infections and possibly even precancerous changes. The reason for these changes is multifactorial. First, there's the stress of launch, adaptation, and confinement. Astronauts experience elevated levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, which is known to suppress immune function. The stress is both physical and psychological, caused by disrupted circadian rhythms, isolation, altered sleep cycles, noise, and constant low-grade tension. Then there's microgravity itself, which alters cellular signaling. Cells float freely rather than settling or migrating along gravity-defined gradients. This affects how immune cells interact with one another, how they respond to chemical signals, and how they travel through tissues. Cytokine profiles. the chemical messages used to coordinate immune responses become skewed. Inflammatory markers rise. Some genes become more active, others fall silent. And then there's radiation. Outside the Earth's protective magnetosphere, astronauts are exposed to cosmic ionizing radiation, high-energy particles that can penetrate the body and damage DNA. This radiation not only increases long-term cancer risk, but also impairs bone marrow function, where many immune cells are born. Some of these effects may be cumulative, others may be unpredictable, but the damage is real. All of this creates an environment where the immune system no longer behaves normally. This isn't hypothetical, it's measurable. One of the clearest signs is the reactivation of latent viruses. On Earth, once you're infected with certain viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, varicella-zoster virus, VZV, or cytomegalovirus, CMV, they never fully leave your body. Instead, they hide in nerve cells or immune cells, kept in check by a vigilant immune system. But in space, these viruses often reactivate. NASA studies have shown that up to 50% of astronauts shed reactivated herpes viruses in their saliva or urine during or after missions. This shedding often occurs without symptoms, but it's a sign that the immune system is struggling to maintain control. In some cases, astronauts have experienced shingles, a painful rash caused by reactivation of VZV or mononucleosis-like symptoms linked to EBV. These episodes are generally manageable, but they highlight the underlying instability of immune regulation in space. Complicating this further is the risk of altered bacterial behavior. Microbes, too, respond to microgravity. Experiments aboard the ISS have shown that certain bacteria become more virulent, grow faster, and develop increased resistance to antibiotics in space. The immune system must work harder to control microbes that are suddenly more aggressive, while itself functioning at reduced capacity. This sets up a troubling dynamic, a weakened defense, faced with stronger invaders. Now consider that any infection in space, no matter how minor, poses outsized risks. A dental abscess, a skin wound, a urinary tract infection. All of these require intervention, and in space, the availability of medical care is extremely limited. A spreading infection could jeopardize not just a crew member's health, but the entire mission. This is why immune monitoring has become a cornerstone of astronaut health management. NASA conducts regular blood draws to assess white blood cell counts, cytokine profiles, and viral shedding. Saliva and urine are sampled to detect reactivation of latent infections. Astronaut stress levels are tracked through questionnaires and hormonal assays. New tools are also being developed, lab-on-a-chip diagnostics that can be used in orbit, compact flow cytometers, and telemedicine-linked bioassays that allow real-time immune assessment from hundreds of miles above Earth. But the challenges aren't limited to monitoring. We're still learning how to mitigate the dysfunction. Exercise helps, not just for muscle and cardiovascular health, but for immune regulation. So does nutrition. Antioxidants like vitamins C and E, selenium, and zinc play a role in immune defense, and their inclusion in astronaut diets is carefully calculated. Adequate protein intake supports the production of immune cells and antibodies. Sleep, too, is critical. Disrupted sleep weakens immunity, and the ISS environment, with its 90-minute orbital day-night cycle and artificial lighting, makes restful sleep difficult. Sleep medications are sometimes used, but their effects on immunity are not fully understood. Probiotics and prebiotics are another promising frontier. By supporting gut microbiota, which are closely linked to immune modulation, astronauts may be able to maintain a more resilient immune response during long missions. Some researchers are even exploring personalized immunomodulators based on an astronaut's genetic and epigenetic immune profile. One day, it might be possible to pre-program immune support for each crew member, adjusting for their specific vulnerabilities. And yet, the deeper we go, the less certain we are. What happens on a trip to Mars, a mission lasting 2 to 3 years? What if the immune system not only weakens but begins to fail in more profound ways? What if a dormant infection activates halfway to the red planet with no possibility of evacuation or resupply? These aren't just medical questions, they are existential ones. The immune system is not just a defense system, it is a memory of Earth. It remembers viruses you've fought, environments you've survived, microbes you've learned to live with. It is a record of your evolutionary past, written in protein and pattern. When you go to space, you take that memory with you. But the context it evolved in is gone. In the vacuum, in the radiation, in the silence, your body's memory becomes unreliable. And so you float, protected by layers of metal, plastic, and protocol, yet vulnerable in a way that few people on Earth ever are. Not just to what lies outside the ship, but to what lies inside your blood. And that's the strangest part. You might not feel sick, you might feel fine, but quietly your immune system might be misreading signals, silencing itself, or fighting shadows that aren't there. Or worse, it might be forgetting how to fight at all. Astronauts don't often speak about this. It's not dramatic like bone loss, not visible like puffiness or peeling skin, but many of them return changed, not just physically, but immunologically. Their T cells take time to normalize. Their viral loads slowly recede, but their immune system remembers the voyage and adjusts accordingly. Space does not make you sick, but it may make you less well in ways that are subtle, cumulative, and deeply human. And perhaps in that truth lies one of the quietest warnings of long-duration spaceflight. That to journey far from Earth is not just to challenge the body, it is to ask it to remember how to defend itself, even when everything it knows has changed. Chapter 7. You can't taste food the same way. In space, even something as ordinary as eating becomes unfamiliar. The mechanics are different. The food is sealed, prepackaged, rehydrated, or thermostabilized. There's no sizzling, no fresh slicing, no aromas wafting through a warm kitchen. But the biggest shift isn't what you eat, it's how you experience it. Astronauts often describe space food as bland, even when it's spiced. Chili sauce becomes a staple. Some crave Tabasco, horseradish, or wasabi, anything to break through the veil that seems to dull flavor. It's not that the food changes, it's that you do. In microgravity, your sense of taste begins to fade. To understand why, we need to explore the physiological relationship between taste, smell, and pressure, all of which are disrupted in space. On Earth, the flavor of food is not simply a function of the tongue. Taste, the ability to detect sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, is just one part of a more complex system. The full experience of flavor comes from retronasal olfaction, where aromas from food in the mouth travel through the nasal cavity to activate scent receptors. Your brain integrates these signals with touch, temperature, and even sound, the crunch of a chip or the sizzle of a steak, to form what we call flavor. This sensory orchestra depends on airflow, gravity, and pressure, three things that spaceflight alters. One of the primary culprits in flavor dulling is cephalad fluid shift. Without gravity pulling fluids toward the legs, bodily fluids redistribute toward the head. Astronauts often report puffy faces, nasal congestion, and sinus fullness, conditions that resemble a mild cold. This congestion interferes with nasal airflow, which is essential for retronasal olfaction. Even if your tongue can still detect salt or sweet, your nose becomes less effective at sensing volatile compounds, the aromatic molecules that define complex flavors like cinnamon, garlic, or coffee. Imagine eating your favorite meal with a clothespin on your nose. You can feel it in your mouth, sense the temperature and texture, but the depth is gone. The brightness, the nuance. This is what many astronauts describe during their first weeks aboard the International Space Station. This blunted experience leads to changes in food preferences. Astronauts often reach for stronger, spicier, or saltier foods, not necessarily because they crave heat, but because those compounds are more likely to activate the receptors that still function well. Capsaicin, the chemical in chili peppers, triggers pain receptors rather than olfactory ones. It doesn't require scent to be perceived. The same is true for salt. Its ion channels stimulate the tongue directly, bypassing the muted olfactory system. Hence, astronauts frequently favor highly seasoned, umami-rich, or spicy options, even if they wouldn't choose them on Earth. But the phenomenon goes deeper than preference. There is evidence that spaceflight affects the sensory neurons themselves. The microgravity environment alters gene expression and signaling in many body systems, including those tied to sensory input. Though research is ongoing, early studies suggest changes in the epithelial lining of the nasal cavity and olfactory receptor neurons after long-duration missions. These effects may be reversible, but they suggest that even the brain's interpretation of scent can be subtly reshaped by life in orbit. There's also the possibility of reduced neuroplasticity over time. On Earth, constant exposure to new environments and diets helps keep the brain's flavor processing systems sharp. But in space, where meals are standardized and variability is low, the neural map of flavor can become less sensitive, a kind of sensory adaptation akin to ignoring background noise. And then there's the food itself. Space food is engineered for safety, longevity, and ease of storage, not culinary delight. It must be non-perishable, easy to rehydrate or heat, and safe in a zero-gravity environment. Crumbs are dangerous. They can float into electronics or lungs, so bread is often replaced by tortillas. Fresh fruits and vegetables are rare luxuries, often consumed within days of resupply. Thermostabilization and irradiation, common preparation techniques, can degrade delicate flavor compounds, particularly those responsible for floral, herbal, or fruity notes. This means that even before sensory changes take effect, the food may already be less vibrant. These constraints make it harder to stimulate an already dulled palate. But what's interesting and a little haunting is how subjective the experience becomes. Some astronauts report that certain foods taste better in space. Coffee, for example, often tastes different, sometimes more acidic, sometimes less aromatic. Others claim that fruit cocktails or tomato-based dishes become favorites, even if they weren't on Earth. These individual differences highlight how much perception matters, that and how it shifts when your internal environment is recalibrated. There's also the emotional and psychological dimension of taste. Eating is not just a physiological need, it's a comfort, a ritual, a reminder of home. In the sterile, metallic atmosphere of a space station, food becomes a rare source of variety and emotional grounding. A familiar taste can trigger a memory. A shared meal can simulate normalcy. When taste fades, that emotional anchor becomes weaker. One astronaut described the experience this way: "I remember eating my favorite granola bar up there. On Earth, it had always been my go-to snack, but in orbit, it just tasted like dust, like chewing memory foam. I stared at the wrapper, expecting more, but it wasn't the bar that had changed, it was me." In that moment, the shift wasn't physical, it was existential. The loss of taste becomes a metaphor for other losses in space, of orientation, of time, of personal rhythm. The world becomes blunter, less textured. The food still nourishes, but the pleasure, the small, private joy of flavor, begins to dissolve. This isn't just a poetic concern. Appetite suppression is a real risk. Many astronauts consume fewer calories than needed during spaceflight, especially during the first 2 weeks. Part of this is adaptation nausea and fluid shifts. But part of it is also the loss of pleasure in eating. If food doesn't taste good, the drive to eat diminishes. Over time, this can contribute to muscle wasting, bone loss, impaired recovery, and weakened immune function. NASA addresses this through dietary planning, food variety, and psychological support. Menus are tailored to individual preferences, and pre-flight taste testing helps select items that are most likely to appeal in orbit. Frequent feedback is encouraged, and adjustments are made when possible. Bonus packs, small containers of favorite foods or condiments, are sometimes included to boost morale. Looking ahead to missions lasting years, such as a journey to Mars, food monotony becomes even more critical. Researchers are exploring ways to grow fresh produce in space using hydroponics and controlled lighting systems. Lettuce, radishes, mustard, peas, and even zinnias have been grown successfully aboard the ISS, not just for nutrition, but for morale. Imagine biting into something truly fresh after 300 days of rehydrated pouches. It may be the closest thing to joy you feel that week. And yet, even if we solve the engineering challenges, one question remains. Can taste ever feel the same when everything around it has changed? Because taste is not just molecular, it is contextual. It's the environment, the soundscape, the gravity of the meal, not just gravitationally but emotionally. You taste through your memories, your sensations, your expectations. In space, many of those anchors fade. The table disappears. The clink of silverware is replaced by Velcro. The scent of cooking is replaced by the hum of ventilation fans. Even your posture, which affects how food moves and feels in your mouth, is different. You float, and your experiences of eating floats too, lighter, thinner, less defined. And that brings us back to the human question at the heart of all this. What does it mean when the act of eating, one of the most primal and grounding parts of being alive, becomes abstract? The body adapts, the brain recalibrates, but something is lost along the way. So astronauts learn to savor what remains: a tangy pouch of shrimp cocktail, a rare piece of chocolate, a shared meal over a tablet screen showing loved ones on Earth. And maybe, just maybe, that loss of taste teaches something profound about resilience, about identity, and about how deeply our biology is tied to our planet. Not just chemically, but sensorially, emotionally, existentially. Because even when you bring Earth's food with you, you don't bring Earth's gravity. And without that grounding force, the flavor never lands the same. Chapter 8. Radiation mutates your cells silently. On Earth, you are never truly alone, not even at the cellular level. Every moment, your DNA is under quiet siege. Cosmic rays from space, ultraviolet light from the sun, radioactive decay from the soil beneath your feet, all these things brush against your molecules. But Earth protects you. The atmosphere shields you. The planet's magnetic field deflects the worst of it. And your body, evolved over billions of years, repairs the rest. But when you leave Earth, that protection is gone. In orbit, in transit, or on the surface of another world, radiation becomes your silent companion. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It slips through your body like a whisper. And when it leaves, it has changed something. Something inside you. Radiation in space comes from several sources, each with its own risks and uncertainties. The two primary types of concern for astronauts are solar particle events, SPEs, and galactic cosmic rays, GCRs. Solar particle events are sudden bursts of high-energy protons, usually emitted by solar flares or coronal mass ejections from the sun. They are intense but short-lived. If unshielded during a strong SPE, an astronaut could receive a radiation dose high enough to cause acute radiation sickness, nausea, vomiting, bone marrow suppression, and in extreme cases, death. Galactic cosmic rays are even more insidious. These are high-energy atomic nuclei, mostly protons and heavier ions like iron and oxygen, that travel through space at nearly the speed of light. They originate from distant supernovae and other astrophysical phenomena far beyond the solar system. Unlike solar particles, GCRs are constant, low-level, and extremely difficult to shield against. These rays can pass through a spacecraft, a spacesuit, even a human body, interacting with atoms along the way, sometimes breaking DNA strands, ionizing molecules, and altering cellular function at the most fundamental level. The radiation dose on the International Space Station is roughly 10 times higher than the average background dose on Earth. For missions to the Moon or Mars, the expected exposure can be hundreds of millisieverts, sometimes surpassing NASA's lifetime limits for astronaut radiation exposure, particularly for female astronauts, who are statistically more susceptible to radiation-induced cancers due to reproductive tissue sensitivity. But this isn't about sunburns or hair loss. This is deeper. This is about mutation. At the heart of every cell is a nucleus, and within it, a double helix of DNA, the blueprint of you. When high-energy radiation strikes, it can do one of three things: break a single strand of DNA, which is relatively easy to repair; break both strands, which is harder to repair and often misrepaired; create chemical modifications, like base changes or crosslinks that confuse the replication machinery. When DNA is misrepaired, the cell may die. Or worse, it may live, but incorrectly. These mutations can lead to cancer, cellular senescence, or disrupted function in sensitive tissues like the heart, brain, or blood vessels. Radiation-induced cancers don't happen immediately. It can take 5, 10, or even 30 years for a mutation to replicate enough times, or to combine with other environmental and genetic factors to become a visible disease. This latency period means that astronauts may feel fine, even as the foundations of their long-term health are being rewritten. The organs most at risk include bone marrow, where blood cells are produced. Damage here can reduce immune function or lead to leukemia. Lungs, especially during planetary EVA, extravehicular activity, where inhalation of fine regolith dust can combine with radiation to amplify inflammation. Digestive tract. High cell turnover rates make it vulnerable to replication errors. Eyes, particularly the lens, where radiation increases the risk of cataracts. Central nervous system, where radiation may subtly alter cognition, mood, or neuroplasticity. In fact, recent studies on mice exposed to space-like radiation have shown measurable cognitive deficits, including impaired memory and decision-making. Though human data remains limited, some long-duration astronauts report space fog, a transient mental fatigue during or after missions. While the exact cause is multifactorial, radiation may be part of that fog. What makes this all so unnerving is the absence of symptoms. You don't feel radiation. You don't hear it, see it, or smell it. It doesn't sting or swell. It just passes through, changing atoms, disrupting molecules, flipping switches inside cells that may not go off until years later. It is, quite literally, a silent rewrite of the body. So how do we protect ourselves? Shielding is the first line of defense. But in space, shielding is complex. Dense materials like lead, commonly used on Earth, are impractical in space due to their weight. Instead, spacecraft use layers of polyethylene, aluminum, and even water, which contains a high concentration of hydrogen, a good absorber of cosmic particles. Some spacecraft designs now incorporate water jackets, fuel tanks, or food stores in the walls as makeshift shields. Future long-duration spacecraft may include storm shelters, small protected chambers where astronauts can retreat during high-radiation solar events. For galactic cosmic rays, however, shielding is only partially effective. Some high-energy particles are so powerful that they not only pass through materials but also create secondary radiation upon impact, new particles generated from collisions with atomic nuclei. This secondary shower can sometimes do more biological damage than the original particle. The next line of defense is biological countermeasures. Research is underway into radioprotective drugs such as amifostine, which may scavenge free radicals and reduce DNA damage. Antioxidants like vitamin E, selenium, or alpha-lipoic acid, which can neutralize oxidative stress. Gene editing or gene therapy to enhance DNA repair pathways or resist radiation damage, though this remains speculative and ethically complex. Cellular therapies such as stem cell infusion post-mission to replenish damaged tissues. But as of now, none of these are approved for routine use in human spaceflight. Instead, space agencies rely on monitoring, tracking dose exposure using dosimeters worn by astronauts or placed throughout the spacecraft. Cumulative limits are imposed, with individual thresholds adjusted for sex, age, and mission profile. Once an astronaut reaches their lifetime maximum, generally around 600 to 1,000 millisieverts, they are often excluded from future deep space missions. This is not just policy, it is triage. And now, the existential layer. When you travel into space, you're not just traveling through distance, you're traveling through risk, across an invisible landscape of charged particles against which your biology is not well defended. And there's something humbling in that, because for all our technology, our radiation shielding, our dosimeters and drugs, we remain vulnerable. We are Earth's creatures. We were shaped by its gravity, its air, and yes, its protection. To float beyond those boundaries is not only brave, it's deeply unnatural. And yet, we go. We go knowing that inside our cells, something may already be changing, that our DNA may not come home exactly as it left, that the silence of space leaves its signature not in bruises or scars, but in mutations, microscopic, enduring, and invisible. One astronaut asked if he feared radiation exposure during a Mars mission, answered this way: "I don't think about cancer in space. I think about meaning. I think about what's worth risking your blueprint for." Perhaps that's what makes this particular threat so haunting. Not that radiation hurts, but that it doesn't. That it leaves no signal as it passes, only the quiet possibility that something essential has changed, that somewhere inside, the script has been altered. A letter here, a base pair there, and that someday, maybe soon, maybe decades later, your body will try to act out this new script. And fail. This is the price we pay for exploration, the risk we carry not in our hands but in our nuclei, and still we go. Chapter 9. You could get a blood clot and not know it. In the stillness of space, where every sound is filtered through layers of fabric and metal, your body continues its work. Blood circulates quietly, oxygen is delivered, waste is collected, and your heart beats, not harder, not softer, just differently. But sometimes, even in that calm, something goes wrong. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send pain shooting through your limbs. It doesn't make you gasp or sweat or seize with fear. It simply forms, quietly, without warning, a blood clot somewhere inside your veins, and you may not even know it's there. Blood clots, or venous thromboembolisms, VTEs, are well known on Earth. They often form in the deep veins of the legs, particularly after long periods of immobility, like airplane travel or bed rest. The danger is not the clot itself, but where it might go. If a piece breaks off and travels to the lungs, it becomes a pulmonary embolism, a potentially life-threatening condition. But in space, the situation is more complex. In 2019, during a routine ultrasound screening aboard the International Space Station, NASA physicians discovered a blood clot in the internal jugular vein of an astronaut's neck. The astronaut had no symptoms, no swelling, no discomfort, no visible reason for concern. It was a fluke of observation, an incidental finding that sparked a quiet alarm through mission control. Because this changed what we thought we knew. To understand why blood clots form in space, we first need to explore how microgravity alters fluid dynamics in the body. On Earth, gravity constantly pulls fluids downward. Your blood, lymph, and interstitial fluids are subject to this pull, and your body works to maintain equilibrium, keeping blood pressure consistent between your head and feet, relying on valves and muscle contractions to prevent pooling. In microgravity, this balance is lost. Cephalad fluid shift causes blood to redistribute toward the chest, neck, and head. Astronauts often appear puffy-faced, congested, with nasal stuffiness and a sensation of pressure behind the eyes. But the real change is inside, where veins swell, venous return increases, and venous stasis begins. Stasis is one of the components of Virchow's triad, a model used to explain the causes of blood clot formation. The triad includes venous stasis, slow or stagnant blood flow, endothelial injury, damage to the vessel lining, hypercoagulability, increased tendency for blood to clot. In space, at least two of these are present. The fluid shift leads to venous stasis, particularly in the internal jugular vein, where blood flow becomes sluggish in microgravity. In some astronauts, ultrasound has shown that flow becomes bidirectional, pulsing back and forth rather than moving consistently toward the heart. This kind of turbulence is an ideal environment for a clot to form. And then there's the possibility of subtle endothelial stress. Prolonged exposure to cosmic radiation, alterations in oxidative stress, and changes in immune function may contribute to a more reactive or damaged vascular lining. Though we don't yet know the full picture, the endothelium, the thin layer of cells lining every blood vessel, may become more susceptible to clot-promoting activity in space. Finally, there's the coagulability of the blood itself. Studies have shown that in space, blood plasma volume decreases. Hematocrit, the concentration of red blood cells, often rises. This makes the blood thicker, more viscous, and potentially more prone to clotting. Together, these factors create a perfect storm. So why do we see more clots? That's the unsettling part. We might, but not know it. Because astronauts are asymptomatic, and because many of them are young, healthy, and exceptionally fit, early signs can be easily missed. Swelling is hidden by the pressure garments they wear. Discomfort is easily attributed to fluid shift or normal mission strain. Shortness of breath is rare and not easily assessed in zero gravity. The 2019 case revealed how little we truly know about in-flight thrombosis. In that case, NASA acted quickly. The astronaut was instructed to self-administer anticoagulant injections. Low molecular weight heparin, followed later by oral blood thinners. A second ultrasound confirmed that the clot had stabilized, and the astronaut completed the mission without complications. But this raises an uncomfortable question. How many others have gone undetected? Routine screenings for deep vein thrombosis are difficult in orbit. Ultrasound devices are available but require trained operators. Most evaluations focus on the heart and larger vessels, not peripheral veins. And even if a clot is detected, treatment options in space are limited. There are no surgical interventions available in orbit, no interventional radiologists, no emergency evacuation if you're on your way to Mars. That's why this discovery, a single silent clot, sent ripples through the aerospace medical community. NASA and its partners have since begun reviewing protocols, developing more robust ultrasound techniques, and considering the inclusion of prophylactic anticoagulation for certain high-risk individuals or mission profiles. New monitoring techniques are in development, including Doppler ultrasound automation, AI-assisted image interpretation, and compact biomarker tests that may one day allow astronauts to detect signs of clotting activity through blood drops or saliva. But these solutions raise complex questions, because anticoagulants, like all medications, behave differently in space. Pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics are altered in microgravity. The way drugs are absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted changes when your liver and kidneys operate under different fluid dynamics and stress loads. And anticoagulants are high-risk medications. Too little and the clot progresses. Too much and the astronaut bleeds, internally, silently, possibly fatally. In an environment where surgical backup is impossible, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. And then there's the existential layer beneath all this. A blood clot is a paradox. It is the body trying to protect itself, to seal a wound, to halt a bleed, to preserve life. But in the wrong place, at the wrong time, it becomes the opposite, a threat. It is a reminder that biology does not always understand its context, that the rules which evolved to keep you alive on Earth can betray you in space. You travel beyond gravity, beyond seasons, beyond the environment that shaped your genes, and your body, loyal and ancient, follows rules it can no longer apply correctly. So a clot forms. a whisper of biology misplaced, and you float, unaware. There's something quietly terrifying about that. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a small change in flow, a bit of turbulence, a sticky cell, a trapped bubble. The threat is not immediate, not even likely, but it's there. And perhaps that's the nature of deep space risk, not loud, but quietly cumulative. Not dramatic failures, but tiny misreadings that echo over time. And yet, we persist, we study, we monitor, we learn. Because every new data point, every ultrasound, every silent clot that doesn't kill, teaches us how to prevent the one that might. So far, we've been lucky. No astronaut has died from a blood clot. No mission has failed because of one. But as we prepare for longer voyages to the moon, to Mars, to months of unbroken isolation, we must understand that risk in space is often not what you see. It's what you don't. It's what you don't feel, don't hear, don't notice, until it matters. So we watch the blood, we model the flow, we simulate the clot, and we remember quietly that even in space, danger doesn't have to make a sound to be real. Chapter 10. You might lose your sense of time. Time on Earth is constant only in theory. In practice, it's felt, experienced, woven into the rhythm of daylight, heartbeat, routine. Morning arrives not just by the sun, but by smell. Fresh coffee, baking bread, traffic rising. Evening folds in on itself with dimmer lights, cooler air, a soft fatigue. The passage of time is not just observed, it's embodied. But when you leave Earth, time becomes something else. A number on a screen, a schedule to follow, an orbit to count, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, your brain stops feeling it the same way. Spaceflight disrupts time perception, a fact known anecdotally for decades, and now being mapped scientifically with increasing precision. Astronauts report disorientation, not just in space and motion, but in sequence and duration. Some days feel stretched, others disappear. Tasks seem to take longer or pass unnoticed. Internal clocks shift. Chronobiology becomes untethered. To understand why, we must first explore circadian rhythms. On Earth, nearly all life follows a roughly 24-hour cycle, shaped by the planet's rotation and regulated by zeitgebers, or time givers. These include light and darkness, temperature, social interaction, meal timing, and physical activity. Your body's master clock, located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, of the hypothalamus, synchronizes thousands of other biological clocks scattered throughout tissues and organs. This internal system controls sleep-wake cycles, hormone secretion, body temperature, reaction time, and even the timing of cell repair. It governs when you feel alert, when you grow tired, when your metabolism rises and falls. But in space, the strongest zeitgeber, the light-dark cycle, is no longer reliable. Aboard the International Space Station, astronauts orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. That means 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets per day. The external cues for day and night become a blur of transitions. Even with artificial lighting and controlled schedules, the body knows something is off. Exposure to irregular or insufficient light disrupts melatonin production, delays or fragments sleep, and weakens the signaling of the SCN. Without consistent light cues, circadian rhythms begin to drift, a phenomenon known as circadian desynchronization. This desynchronization has real effects. One of the most immediate consequences is sleep disturbance. NASA's studies have shown that astronauts sleep on average 6 hours per night in space, often fragmented, lighter, and of lower quality than on Earth. Even with sleep medication, which is commonly used in orbit, astronauts often report non-restorative rest, daytime sleepiness, and increased fatigue. This isn't just a matter of comfort, it impacts cognitive function, reaction time, memory, and emotional regulation. But the distortion goes deeper. Recent cognitive tests in orbit, including time estimation, duration judgment, and temporal order memory, reveal a consistent pattern. Astronauts often underestimate how much time has passed, overestimate how long tasks will take, and struggle with sequencing events after long missions. In one ESA study, participants on long-duration space flights demonstrated impaired interval timing, particularly for short durations, under 1 minute. This suggests that time compression, the sensation that events are happening faster than they really are, may become more common in orbit. Some researchers attribute this to changes in dopaminergic signaling. Dopamine is involved not only in motivation and movement, but also in the brain's internal stopwatch. Microgravity, stress, altered sleep, and nutrition may all affect dopamine pathways, subtly reshaping time perception at the neurochemical level. There are also changes in attention and memory. When external time cues are removed or inconsistent, your brain relies more heavily on internal markers, bodily rhythms, emotional salience, or task complexity to track time. In the sterile, repetitive, artificially lit environment of a spacecraft, many of those cues are flattened. Days blend, activities repeat, time begins to lose texture. Then there's the psychological experience. On Earth, time feels fast when you're busy. It drags when you're bored. It crawls when you're anxious. But in space, those emotional calibrations break down. Long missions are often described as monotonous but intense, a paradox where daily routine is mind-numbingly repetitive, but the stakes are always high. One misstep, one miscalculation, could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. This duality creates a strange temporal effect. Days feel long, but months vanish. Tasks feel endless, but the mission flies by. Some astronauts have compared the experience to a dream. You remember fragments, you recall images, but the sequence, the sense of when, is distorted. And then there's isolation. In deep space missions, beyond low Earth orbit, communication delays with Earth will increase. On a Mars mission, radio signals can take up to 22 minutes to travel one way. Conversations become time-shifted. Feedback is delayed. Real-time interaction disappears. You become temporally unmoored, not only from the body's rhythms, but from the rhythm of society. On Earth, your schedule is reinforced by others, waking with your partner, meeting with colleagues, dining with friends. In space, especially in long isolation analog missions or future interplanetary travel, those social synchronizers are absent. The result is a subjective decoupling from Earth time, a sense that while the planet continues to turn, your own internal clock runs differently. And sometimes, nowhere at all. This may explain why some astronauts experience episodes of time disorientation, where they cannot easily recall the day of the week or even the time of day without checking a device. And in some cases, a more profound question arises. Does time still matter the same way when it no longer touches your skin? To combat this, NASA and its international partners use a multi-pronged strategy. Lighting systems aboard the ISS have been upgraded to mimic natural light cycles, with adjustable brightness and color temperature that simulate sunrise, daylight, and dusk. Exposure schedules are tailored to mission needs, such as sleep protection or pre-landing alertness. Task structuring is used to provide temporal anchors, routines, checklists, briefings, meals that reinforce a sense of daily progression. Psychological support includes monitoring for signs of depression or temporal disorientation. Crew members are encouraged to engage in hobbies, maintain personal rituals, and celebrate Earth-based holidays to preserve emotional connection to home. Experiments are underway with augmented reality and virtual presence tools to create a stronger sense of place and time continuity during long missions. But perhaps the most interesting developments come from analog research. In isolation experiments, such as Mars 500, NEMO, and HI-SEAS, volunteers live in confined environments simulating space missions, often for months. Researchers track their cognitive and psychological performance, including time perception. In Mars 500, participants spent 520 days in a sealed habitat. Over time, their sleep-wake cycles drifted, despite regular scheduling. Subjective reports showed temporal flattening, days becoming indistinguishable, memory for events becoming blurry and motivation fluctuating. Some individuals adapted, others struggled, but all of them reported a kind of temporal weightlessness, a loss of time's emotional shape. And here perhaps we find the most human layer of this experience. Time is not just something we measure, it is something we feel, something we use to orient our sense of self, past, present, future. It's in the rhythm of a conversation, the pulse of a poem, the moment before a kiss. When time becomes abstract, reduced to digital counts or orbital logs, something inside us shifts. You still breathe, you still move, but the feel of life begins to thin. In space, your body may drift, but so might your sense of when you are. Days pass without meaning, moments blur, and in that subtle erosion you face a question: who are you when you don't know where in time you are? Not lost in space, but lost in sequence, in pacing, in personal chronology. And perhaps this is the true cost of distance, not just the miles between you and Earth, but the quiet widening of the space between your thoughts. The tick of time becomes soft, distant, uncertain, and all you can do is trust your breath, your schedule, your training. Trust the blinking cursor, the meal timer, the exercise alarm, and wait for the day when Earth's rotation welcomes you back, when your shadow returns, when time once again feels like something you're living in, not just floating through. Chapter 11. Your skin gets thinner and you bruise easier. The human body is encased in a remarkable organ, flexible, regenerative, perceptive. Your skin is not just a boundary, it is a conversation. Every brush of wind, every beam of sunlight, every grain of dust, your skin feels it first. It is your contact with the world, your armor, your warning system. But in space, this armor begins to weaken, slowly, quietly, without trauma or injury, until one day a small impact, a bump against the wall, a careless scratch, leaves a mark that lingers too long. Your skin is thinning, and with it something deeper begins to fade, the barrier between you and the environment that once shaped you. At a glance, skin seems like an afterthought in space medicine, not as vital as bones, muscles, the brain, or the heart. But your skin is your largest organ, comprising around 15% of your total body weight and stretching across nearly 2 square meters of surface area. It performs critical roles in thermoregulation, immune defense, hydration control, and sensory perception. It is also a profoundly adaptive organ, constantly renewing itself. The outermost layer, the epidermis, is completely replaced every 28 to 40 days under Earth conditions. This dynamic regeneration depends on stem cell activity, blood flow, mechanical stress, and exposure to environmental signals. And that's where spaceflight begins to interfere. In microgravity, the mechanical forces acting on the body change dramatically. On Earth, your skin is compressed, stretched, and sheared continuously. Walking, sitting, lying down, carrying weight, all these actions subject skin to pressure, promoting cell turnover, collagen remodeling, and microvascular responsiveness. In space, you float. Your skin is no longer pressed against surfaces. The normal stresses that stimulate skin renewal are absent. Instead, tissues shift upward, internal pressure changes, and contact with surroundings becomes more randomized and inconsistent. As a result, epidermal regeneration slows down. The stratum corneum, the outermost layer of dead skin cells, builds up and sheds unpredictably, forming floating flakes that must be carefully filtered from spacecraft air systems. More concerningly, the dermal layer, rich in collagen and elastin, begins to thin. Recent studies conducted on astronauts returning from 6-month ISS missions revealed measurable skin atrophy. Ultrasound and high-frequency imaging showed that the thickness of the skin on the forearms and lower legs was reduced by up to 10%. The collagen matrix, which gives skin its tensile strength, appeared less organized and more fragmented. This degradation correlates with increased bruising. On Earth, bruises form when blood vessels near the skin's surface rupture from trauma, allowing blood to seep into surrounding tissue. The body responds by reabsorbing this blood over days or weeks, gradually changing color from red to purple to yellow. In space, bruises appear faster, linger longer, and sometimes occur without obvious cause. This suggests not just skin thinning, but also capillary fragility and slower healing. Conditions likely influenced by reduced mechanical conditioning, altered vascular tone, and potential radiation effects. Cosmic radiation plays a subtler but significant role. Unlike the visible effects of sunlight, galactic cosmic rays and solar particles don't just strike the surface, they penetrate. Over long durations, this ionizing radiation damages DNA and skin stem cells, impairs fibroblast function, and generates free radicals that degrade collagen. There is growing concern that repeated missions, or long stays in deep space, could lead to accelerated skin aging, characterized by increased dryness and flaking, fine wrinkling, hyperpigmentation or blotchiness, reduced elasticity, increased susceptibility to skin tears and microabrasions. In this sense, astronauts may be aging faster on the outside, even as their internal functions adapt to microgravity. Compounding the issue is hydration. Spaceflight is known to cause a reduction in plasma volume, which can lead to mild dehydration unless carefully managed. Dehydrated skin becomes less supple, more prone to cracking, and slower to regenerate. Humidity aboard the ISS is carefully controlled, but small fluctuations can still affect the transepidermal water loss, the rate at which moisture escapes through the skin. Without Earth's protective atmosphere and fluctuating ambient conditions, the skin's natural barrier function may become less robust. Even the act of bathing changes. Water doesn't behave the same way in microgravity. Showers are impractical. Instead, astronauts rely on rinseless wipes, sponge baths, or minimal water-based hygiene. While functional, these methods don't remove oils and dead skin as effectively, which may contribute to clogged pores or irritations, even minor infections. The longer the mission, the greater the risk. NASA's Human Research Program is actively studying skin biomechanics in space. Projects are underway to measure epidermal integrity, moisture retention, barrier function, and microbiome stability across mission durations. One of the key goals is to understand how immune changes, fluid shifts, and environmental exposure converge to impact dermal health. Another concern is wound healing. In microgravity, wound closure is delayed. Animal models have shown that skin cuts heal more slowly, inflammatory responses are altered, and collagen deposition is reduced. Minor cuts can become persistent irritants. Scratches don't resolve cleanly. The same bruise that would resolve in days on Earth might linger for weeks in orbit. This is especially troubling when paired with weakened immunity, which we've already discussed. A small skin breach in a terrestrial hospital might be treated with antiseptic and left alone. In space, it could lead to a prolonged immune response, potential infection, or performance-limiting discomfort. To counter these changes, several strategies are employed. Compression garments are used to stimulate circulation and provide mechanical input to the skin and underlying vessels. These suits help reduce venous pooling and may improve skin tone by reintroducing a form of tactile pressure. Nutritional interventions are also key. Diets rich in collagen-building nutrients, such as vitamin C, zinc, lysine, and proline, help support skin regeneration. Omega-3 fatty acids may reduce inflammation and support dermal structure. Adequate hydration is carefully monitored, with electrolyte-balanced fluids provided regularly. Crew members are encouraged to report skin changes, bruises, or delayed healing as part of their medical check-ins. Photographic monitoring is sometimes used to track healing progression and identify early warning signs. For longer missions to the Moon or Mars, researchers are exploring advanced wound care kits, including hydrocolloid dressings, portable diagnostic tools, and bioprinting patches that could create skin-like structures on demand. And yet, despite all these precautions, skin remains vulnerable, not because it fails, but because it was never meant for this. It evolved for sunlight, pressure, friction, for wind, rain, and texture, for the feeling of feet on the ground and clothes brushing the shoulders. In space, it is untouched in a strange way, deprived of its expected input, and over time it forgets how to be itself. There's something quietly poetic and existential in this shift, because your skin is not just a container, it's how you feel the world. When it changes, your perception of self changes too. The boundary between you and the universe becomes thinner, more permeable. You begin to lose the daily texture of being human. The nicks and itches, the warmth of sun on forearms, the tactile rhythm of walking through a crowded room. Instead, you're in a sealed suit, in a controlled cabin, brushing against walls with gloves, feeling only filtered air and synthetic materials. Your skin over time mirrors that detachment. It becomes more fragile, less expressive. A kind of silence settles across the surface. And in that silence, you begin to sense how deeply Earth was holding you, not just through gravity, but through touch. So you moisturize, you monitor, you float gently, and you wait for the moment. Months later, when you return to Earth, step into sunlight, feel the breeze, and remember what it meant to be touched by a living world. Your skin will heal, it will grow thick again, but the memory of space, of softness, silence, and thinness may never fully leave. Chapter 12. You could vomit into your own helmet. It sounds absurd at first, a grim punchline from a dark comedy about space travel. But behind the humor lies a frightening truth. Vomiting into your helmet is not just possible, it could be deadly. On Earth, vomiting is rarely dangerous by itself. Messy, uncomfortable, perhaps indicative of something deeper, but not inherently fatal. Gravity, posture, and reflexes all conspire to help you survive the experience. But in space, your relationship with your body changes. And sometimes something as simple as nausea becomes a question of life and death. Let's begin with the basics. Space motion sickness, or SMS, is not a myth. It's not an imaginary affliction or an exaggeration. It's a well-documented condition that affects 60–80% of astronauts during their first few days in microgravity. It arises from a mismatch between what your inner ear senses and what your eyes see. On Earth, your brain has learned to reconcile input from your vestibular system, the fluid-filled semicircular canals and otolith organs in your inner ear, with visual and proprioceptive cues. When you stand up, turn, or tilt, your inner ear detects acceleration and position relative to gravity. Your eyes confirm the motion. Your muscles compensate. In space, that alignment is broken. There is no gravity vector to inform your sense of up. The otoliths, which normally detect linear acceleration, become confused. Your semicircular canals, now floating in weightlessness, deliver signals that don't match what your eyes report. Your brain becomes unsure whether you're moving, floating, spinning, or all three at once. The result? Nausea, disorientation, headaches, sweating, loss of appetite, vomiting. It is, in effect, the same mismatch that causes seasickness or carsickness, only amplified by the total removal of gravity. Now imagine that you're on an extravehicular activity, EVA, a spacewalk. You're suited up, you've passed through the airlock. Outside, the Earth spins below you in silence. Your limbs float within your suit like you're submerged in oil. Every movement is deliberate, every breath is monitored, and then suddenly, you feel it. That familiar tightening in the stomach, that wave of heat in the face, that rising surge in your throat. You are about to vomit, but this time, you're not leaning over a toilet or a bag. You're inside a sealed helmet, in a pressurized suit, tethered to a spacecraft by a few cords and cables. There is nowhere for the vomit to go. The helmet is designed to protect your head from decompression, micrometeoroids, radiation, and thermal extremes, not to accommodate regurgitation. There's no drain, no flap to open, no way to remove the helmet mid-spacewalk. What happens if you vomit? The fluid can obscure your vision, coating the visor in a sticky haze. It can block your nose and mouth, making it difficult to breathe. It can float in tiny globs around your face, held together by surface tension, clinging to the inner curve of your helmet. You could choke, inhale particles, or asphyxiate. The suit's airflow system might be able to clear some of it. Air enters from the back and flows over the face, but it's not designed for fluids. Filters can clog, pumps can malfunction. There is no emergency eject, no panic button that says, "Get me out." That's why SMS during EVA is taken so seriously. To prevent such a scenario, space agencies take multiple precautions. First, spacewalks are not scheduled during the first 48 to 72 hours of a mission, when space motion sickness is most likely to occur. This allows the astronaut's brain time to adapt, to reweight sensory input, to recalibrate the inner ear, to establish a new normal. Second, astronauts are often prescribed anti-nausea medications before EVA. Scopolamine and promethazine are common choices, drugs known to reduce vestibular nausea. Some are delivered transdermally via patches behind the ear. Others are taken orally or by injection. Still, no medication is perfect. Side effects include drowsiness, confusion, and impaired cognition, not ideal during a high-risk maneuver outside the station. And then there's training. Astronauts practice vomiting in simulators. They rehearse what to do if they feel sick during EVA. Some suits have absorbent pads or vomit collection pockets, though these are far from ideal. It's not just EVAs where vomiting is dangerous. Even inside the spacecraft, vomiting in zero gravity is a logistical nightmare. On Earth, fluids follow gravity. In space, they float. Vomit doesn't splash down. It hovers, forming a globby, sticky cloud that can contaminate surfaces, electronics, air filters, or float into the mouths and eyes of crewmates. It must be contained immediately, often with a specially designed bag that includes a zip seal and absorbent lining. But timing is everything. Vomiting into open air, even for a moment, can endanger the health of the entire crew. The ISS's environmental control system is finely tuned. Contamination, even by something as mundane as stomach contents, can introduce risk: microbial growth, foul odors, clogged fans, or instrument damage. In a spacecraft, your body is not just yours, it's part of an ecosystem. What leaves your body, sweat, breath, waste, vomit, is the habitat for 6 other people, and everything floats. So why does vomiting remain a problem, even after decades of spaceflight? Because your brain never truly stops expecting gravity. Even seasoned astronauts report mild nausea during position changes after sleeping or during visual shifts, such as moving from a tight module to a panoramic cupola. The brain, despite its adaptability, is deeply wired for Earth. And it's not just motion sickness that causes vomiting. Stress, illness, medication reactions, bad food, and emotional overwhelm can all trigger it. In one rare case, an astronaut reportedly vomited due to psychological strain. The sight of Earth receding, the isolation, the sheer magnitude of the experience. Another case was tied to a bacterial overgrowth in the gut, a common occurrence when immunity is down and food is rehydrated from pouches that may harbor trace contaminants. In deep space, on missions to Mars or beyond, these risks compound. There will be no return window, no quick evacuation. If someone vomits during an EVA on Mars or in a suit on the Moon, their survival may depend entirely on how well they were prepared to manage that moment. And here's where the existential undertone slips in, quietly, like nausea rising. Vomiting is among the most primal acts. It is the body's rejection of something unsafe, unwanted, a purge, an expulsion. On Earth, it's often followed by relief. But in space, it becomes a threat, a breach of the system, a failure of containment. And that's the irony. The very act designed to protect your body becomes the one that could endanger your life. It's a metaphor in some ways for the larger experience of spaceflight. Your body, evolved for one world, carries its reflexes into another. But those reflexes, sweating, coughing, vomiting, become unpredictable in the new environment. Earthly instincts don't always translate, and so you must relearn, retrain, re-engineer not just your tools, but your habits. In space, even your own biology becomes something to manage. Astronauts accept this. They laugh about it in interviews. Some even joke about who vomited the fastest or the most. Humor is part of resilience. But beneath that levity is deep respect for the fragility of human function, for the risks of simple acts, for the realization that nothing in space is truly simple. You bring your body with you, but it no longer behaves the way you expect. You are floating, breathing, seeing, and you know that at any moment, something as small as a queasy stomach could test the limits of your suit, your systems, your survival. And that's what makes it scary. Not the vomiting, but the helplessness, the containment, the silence that follows. The knowledge that in space, even your body's attempt to protect itself must be carefully choreographed, or it may kill you. Chapter 13. You start losing calcium through your urine. Bone is not just scaffolding. It's not the rigid casing we often imagine. Beneath its solid exterior lies something dynamic, a living, breathing tissue that's constantly torn down and rebuilt in a delicate balance between growth and decay. Every step you take, every gravitational tug you feel, sends subtle messages to your skeleton. Strengthen here. Reinforce this. Hold the line. But in space, gravity goes silent. And when that message disappears, your bones begin to forget who they are. In microgravity, the absence of mechanical loading, the weight that gravity naturally applies to bones through movement, causes a fundamental shift in skeletal behavior. The cells responsible for building bone, called osteoblasts, slow their activity. Meanwhile, osteoclasts, the cells that break down bone tissue, continue their work, or even speed up. The result? Bone loss. Gradual, persistent, measurable. This isn't a subtle phenomenon. Astronauts lose 1 to 2% of bone mass per month in space, particularly in weight-bearing regions like the pelvis, spine, and femurs. Over the course of a 6-month mission aboard the ISS, that's a loss equivalent to what elderly individuals on Earth might experience over a decade. But unlike age-related osteoporosis, space-induced bone loss happens without the usual compensatory mechanisms. There is no gravitational feedback to say enough. The body assumes it no longer needs such dense scaffolding. But the loss of bone is only half the story. The other half is what happens to what's left behind. As bones demineralize, the calcium they once held is released into the bloodstream. Your body, ever efficient, does what it always does. It filters out the excess and sends it away, into your urine. And so quietly, your body begins excreting its own skeleton. This process is called hypercalciuria, and it's one of the most consistent metabolic findings in astronauts during long-duration spaceflight. Elevated calcium in the urine can begin within days of arrival in orbit and may continue for weeks or months. On Earth, the kidneys maintain a delicate balance of calcium reabsorption and excretion. But in space, that balance is skewed. The extra calcium overwhelms normal pathways, leading to increased urinary calcium levels that are among the highest seen in otherwise healthy individuals. This excess doesn't just disappear. It poses several risks, some immediate, some long-term. The most immediate danger is the formation of kidney stones. Calcium, when combined with oxalate or phosphate, can crystallize into sharp, dense formations. On Earth, dehydration, diet, and genetics are the primary contributors to stone formation. In space, hypercalciuria, coupled with mild fluid loss and reduced urine flow, creates ideal conditions for stones to form. And in microgravity, kidney stones are more than painful. They are mission-threatening. A stone lodged in the ureter can block urine flow, cause excruciating pain, induce vomiting, and compromise an astronaut's ability to function. There is no surgical support in orbit, no lithotripsy machine to break the stone. Evacuation is limited or impossible during deep space missions. Even small stones, millimeters in size, could disable a crew member for hours or days. This is why space agencies take the risks so seriously. Astronauts are screened for stone history, monitored for urinary changes, and placed on strict hydration protocols. Their intake of dietary calcium and oxalates is carefully controlled. Some are prescribed potassium citrate to reduce the risk of stone formation by alkalinizing the urine. Despite these measures, calcium loss continues. But where does that leave the bones? The danger isn't just what exits the body, it's what remains. Studies using DEXA scans, ultrasound, and quantitative CT have revealed significant reductions in bone mineral density (BMD) after prolonged missions. The trabecular bone, the spongy inner matrix most sensitive to weight bearing, is particularly affected. Upon return to Earth, this can manifest as increased risk of fractures, even during minor impacts. Reduced balance and coordination tied to skeletal and muscular deconditioning, persistent joint pain, and postural instability. Recovery is possible, but slow. For some astronauts, regaining pre-flight BMD can take 1 to 3 years. Others never fully recover. And for future missions to Mars, the Moon, or deep space, where return may not be possible, the consequences of cumulative bone loss become even more concerning. To fight back, exercise becomes medicine. Every astronaut aboard the ISS adheres to a strict exercise regimen, including resistive training, using machines like RED, Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, which simulate weightlifting using vacuum cylinders and flywheels, treadmill running with harnesses to mimic gravitational loading, cycling on stationary bikes for cardiovascular conditioning. Studies show that this regimen can reduce bone loss, and in some areas, even reverse it. But it requires 2 hours a day, every day. Any deviation increases risk, and even with perfect adherence, some loss still occurs. In future habitats, such as those on the Moon or Mars, where gravity is partial, new strategies will be needed. Will lunar gravity, at 1/6 Earth's, be enough to maintain bone health? Or will we need to supplement it with artificial gravity, pharmaceuticals, or gene-based interventions? These are not just theoretical questions. They are survival questions. And here's where the existential layer emerges, not in fear, but in reflection. Your bones are not just calcium and protein, they are history. The shape of your skeleton reflects your ancestry, your childhood, your habits. The curve of your spine, the angle of your femur, the wear of your joints. These are the traces of a life lived under gravity. And when you go to space, that history begins to dissolve. You carry your bones with you, and they begin to flow out of you. Not all at once, not with pain, just slowly, silently through your kidneys, into your waist. You lose the part of you that held you up. And perhaps that's what makes it so quietly terrifying. Your body doesn't resist. It complies, it adapts. It says if we don't need this structure, we'll let it go. And that adaptation, so vital for survival, carries a cost. One astronaut put it like this: you don't feel the calcium leaving. You just feel a little less anchored. And maybe that's the truth, that your bones were more than just load-bearing columns. They were a message from Earth, a promise of resistance, a memory of pressure. In space, when that message fades, your body starts to rewrite itself. And part of that rewriting is erasure. Scientists continue to explore new therapies. Parathyroid hormone analogs like teriparatide are being tested as potential countermeasures to stimulate bone formation. Bisphosphonates, used in osteoporosis treatment on Earth, have shown promise in reducing bone resorption during spaceflight. Some researchers are exploring nutritional modulation, optimizing vitamin D synthesis, which is limited in space due to lack of sunlight, enhancing protein intake, and adjusting amino acid balance to support musculoskeletal health. Others dream bigger, of rotating spacecraft that simulate gravity through centrifugal force, providing constant mechanical loading, of CRISPR-edited cells that resist osteoclastic activation, of bioprinted scaffolds that one day replace lost bone in vivo. But those solutions are still distant. For now, we manage, we monitor, we train, we hydrate, and we accept that each day in space costs a little more calcium. And when the mission ends and the astronauts return, they stand once again under gravity, not as they were, but relearning to walk, to stand tall, to carry their own weight. Their bones will rebuild, but they will remember. And deep inside, so will we, that we were made for gravity, and when we leave it behind, our very structure begins to drift. Chapter 14. Your brain literally changes shape. Your brain, this soft, wrinkled mass nestled in the safety of your skull, is often thought of as fixed, set, like a command center that processes, calculates, responds. But this is a misunderstanding. The brain is not static. It is plastic, not in composition, but in behavior. It bends, it molds, it adapts, even to space, because when gravity disappears, your brain listens, and in the silence, it reshapes itself. The human brain is about 75% water. It floats in cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, which cushions it, nourishes it, and removes waste. This delicate balance between brain tissue, blood, and CSF is tightly regulated under Earth's gravity. But in space, gravity disappears, and the rules that held everything in place dissolve. One of the most striking discoveries of the last decade in space neuroscience is that your brain physically shifts upward in microgravity. MRI scans of astronauts before and after long-duration missions show clear, reproducible changes. The brain rises within the skull, compressing against the top and stretching away from the base. The ventricles, hollow cavities that contain cerebrospinal fluid, enlarge, sometimes dramatically. The sulci, or grooves on the brain's surface, narrow. The overall gray matter volume redistributes, thinning in some regions while thickening in others. These aren't just cosmetic changes. They affect how the brain functions, how it moves, and possibly how it feels to inhabit your own mind. Let's begin with the mechanical effects. On Earth, gravity pulls fluids down, and that includes the CSF. It settles slightly, maintaining a pressure gradient between the top and bottom of the brain. In space, that gradient disappears. CSF begins to accumulate in the upper regions, pressing the brain upward. This causes the brain to shift by several millimeters, a movement that may sound small, but inside the rigid confines of the skull, it's significant. The optic nerves can become compressed. The pituitary gland may flatten. The corpus callosum, the thick band of fibers connecting the hemispheres, appears slightly bowed. Some astronauts develop a condition known as SANS, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Symptoms include visual changes, such as blurred vision or difficulty focusing, swelling of the optic disc called papilledema, flattening of the eyeball, folds in the retina. These visual symptoms, once thought to be temporary, can persist for months or longer. And while SANS was first identified through eye exams, it's now understood to be part of a broader shift in brain structure and intracranial dynamics. Then there are the cognitive effects. NASA and ESA have conducted numerous neurocognitive studies before, during, and after spaceflight. These include tasks that measure reaction time, memory, spatial orientation, executive function, attention, and dual-task performance. While astronauts generally perform well, subtle declines have been noted, particularly in processing speed and complex decision-making after long missions. Post-flight brain scans have revealed changes in gray matter volume, decreases in areas related to movement planning, such as the motor cortex and cerebellum, and increases in areas related to visual and spatial processing, perhaps reflecting neuroplastic adaptations to microgravity. The sensory motor network, which helps coordinate movement and balance, also shows functional changes. This makes sense. In space, you don't walk, run, or balance. You float. Your inner ear, muscles, and brain must coordinate in entirely new ways, often without familiar feedback loops. So the brain learns, it rewires, it reshapes. But this adaptability comes at a price. The brain's remodeling isn't always beneficial. Some changes may be compensatory, but others may reflect stress or disuse. For instance, reductions in the cerebellum may correlate with post-flight balance issues. Structural shifts in the frontal lobe, involved in attention and executive function, may contribute to the space fog some astronauts report, and no one yet knows how permanent these changes are. While many brain structures gradually return to baseline post-flight, some do not, even after a year or more. Ventricular enlargement, in particular, appears to be long-lasting. This raises important questions about cumulative effects for astronauts who undertake multiple missions. What happens after 2 flights, or 5, or after a 1,000-day journey to Mars? We do not yet know. There's also the psychological dimension. Space is isolating, confined, and monotonous. The brain is deeply social, and in the absence of natural stimuli, weather, crowds, changing terrain, it begins to stretch for meaning. Some astronauts report altered states of consciousness, time distortion, emotional flattening, vivid dreams. Others describe a sense of detachment from reality, not hallucination, but a kind of cognitive echo where things feel slightly unreal. This may reflect changes in the default mode network, DMN, a brain system associated with introspection, memory, and the sense of self. Some researchers speculate that microgravity may alter the way this network functions, affecting how we perceive internal versus external stimuli, or how we construct a continuous sense of identity. In deep space, where Earth is just a pale dot and conversations are delayed by minutes, this altered perception could become more pronounced. And the idea that your sense of self, your you-ness, could shift just because your brain is floating differently, that carries existential weight. To study these effects, neuroscientists use tools like MRI and fMRI scans pre- and post-flight, diffusion tensor imaging DTI to assess white matter integrity, electroencephalography EEG to track brainwave activity, transcranial Doppler ultrasonography to monitor cerebral blood flow in orbit, behavioral testing platforms aboard the ISS. These tools help map not just structural changes, but functional consequences, what the brain is doing with its new shape. Still, it's early. Space neuroscience is barely a few decades old. And the human brain, 400,000 kilometers from home, is still writing its own case study. And here, quietly, the existential undertone begins to hum. Because the brain is not just a controller, it is you. Your memories, your preferences, your fears, your capacity for wonder. When it shifts, even physically, it becomes difficult not to ask, if the shape of my brain changes, am I still the same? What happens to thought in a reshaped container? Does perspective shift? Do values blur? Does emotion flatten not from numbness, but from unfamiliar wiring? Some astronauts report feeling more reflective, more connected to humanity, more aware of fragility. Others report difficulty reintegrating, a sense that Earth, in all its noise and momentum, feels alien after the silence of orbit. Perhaps the brain doesn't just process the experience of space. Perhaps it becomes it. Future missions may need to address brain adaptation as both a medical and a psychological challenge. Possible countermeasures include artificial gravity through rotating habitats to restore fluid gradients and mechanical loading, pharmacological support, such as drugs that modulate CSF production or neuroplasticity, brain stimulation techniques like TDCS to maintain cognitive performance, enhanced cognitive training, including memory, focus, and emotional resilience, improved lighting and sensory environments to support circadian rhythm and cognitive mapping. But these interventions must be developed with care. The brain is not a simple machine. It is contextual, responsive, alive in the deepest sense. What helps on Earth may confuse in space. What heals one crew member may stress another. Because when the brain begins to reshape, when it listens to the silence, the floating, the hours without sunset, it becomes something new. Not better, not worse, just altered. And perhaps that is the price of venturing into the unknown, that we bring ourselves, but we don't return unchanged. Chapter 15. You can't cry normally, your tears just float. Crying is something deeply human. It's how we enter the world, how how we express joy, grief, frustration, relief, a primal language without words. On Earth, tears fall. They trace the contours of your cheeks, drip onto your shirt, vanish into your skin or the ground beneath your feet. But in space, even sorrow behaves differently. Because in microgravity, tears don't fall. They gather, they cling, they float, stubbornly held to your eyes by surface tension, refusing to drop, refusing to give you the simple, cathartic gesture of letting go. You can cry in space, but you can't cry the same way. Physiologically, crying is governed by the lacrimal system, a set of small glands above each eye that continuously secrete tear fluid. These tears serve three essential purposes: to lubricate the eye, to protect it from irritants, and to express emotion. There are three types of tears: basal tears, which keep the eye moist; reflex tears, which respond to irritants like onions or wind; emotional tears, which accompany strong feelings. While all three are chemically distinct, they share the same basic path. They spread across the eye surface, collect near the inner corner, and usually drain through tiny ducts into the nasal cavity, or when in excess, overflow and fall down the cheek. But that entire system relies subtly on gravity. In microgravity, this drainage breaks down. There's no gravitational pull guiding the tears downward. Instead, they pool in the eye socket. As more fluid is secreted, it doesn't escape, it collects. What would have been a gentle stream becomes a stubborn, swelling blob. Astronauts describe this as a stinging or burning sensation. The fluid builds until it distorts vision. It blurs, not in streaks but in haze. Eventually, the blob becomes large enough to float away, slowly detaching from the eye, drifting into the cabin, threatening to cling to a control panel or contaminate equipment. The very act of crying becomes an engineering problem. Chris Hadfield, a Canadian astronaut and former ISS commander, famously demonstrated this phenomenon in a video. He squeezed out artificial tears into his eye and watched as they refused to fall. Instead, they grew into a shimmering dome over his eye, distorting his vision and clinging like jelly. As he explained it, "Your eyes make tears, but they don't fall off. So you just get a bigger and bigger ball of liquid on your eye until it eventually migrates somewhere else." This is not just inconvenient, it's potentially hazardous. In space, floating liquids pose multiple risks. They can block the field of vision, they can enter nasal passages and cause choking or irritation. They can damage sensitive equipment or lenses. They can serve as a medium for microbial growth, if not cleaned immediately. Astronauts are trained to wipe tears away manually before they become mobile. Special cloths, visors, and airflow systems help control rogue fluids. But if an emotional moment hits during EVA while wearing a sealed helmet, there is no wiping, no tissues, just the internal airflow system and your own patience. If tears pool under your eyes in a suit, you have no way to clear them. They may sting, they may blur your vision, but they will not fall. And in that stubborn refusal to let go, there is something haunting. Tears in space are not just a physiological curiosity. They're a window into how the body adapts and how the mind adjusts. Because crying is not just physical, it is emotional regulation. It is how we process complex internal states when words fall short. We cry when we're overwhelmed, when we remember, when we love too deeply, when we feel helpless or redeemed. What happens when that process is interrupted? Astronauts report a wide range of emotions in space. Most describe the experience as exhilarating, profound, even spiritual. But they also speak of loneliness, isolation, and melancholy. They miss the sounds of nature, the feel of weather, the smell of home. They long for the grounding presence of gravity, not just on their body, but on their emotions. Some report dreams of falling or of crying, only to wake and realize they cannot cry the same way. Some feel a buildup of feeling that never quite releases. Others suppress tears entirely, knowing that to cry is to invite discomfort, blurred vision, floating hazards. NASA psychologists monitor astronauts throughout their missions for signs of emotional stress. They conduct mood assessments, cognitive tests, and private psychological support sessions. But emotion in orbit remains a delicate subject. Not because astronauts are unwilling to feel, but because feeling is complicated in space. You're in a small habitat. Privacy is limited. Your team depends on you. And even if something breaks your heart, a message from home, a news story, a personal memory, you may choose not to cry, or not be able to. Because to cry in space is to confront not just emotion, but the physics of grief. There's an existential beauty in that, isn't there? That even your most human instincts, the saltwater proof of sorrow, are transformed when you leave the world that made you. Your body still remembers how to cry, but the universe offers no place for the tears to go. They linger, they hover, they reflect light in spherical shimmers before drifting away. Your grief becomes untethered. And yet, there is hope in that too. Because even in altered form, tears still come. They still form. The lacrimal gland still responds. Emotion still stirs. Even in the vacuum-adjacent void, inside polymer suits and pressurized cans of oxygen and carbon dioxide, the human emotional system endures. You might not cry like you used to, but you still feel like you always have. NASA and ESA are studying how to make space more emotionally supportive. Artificial gravity might restore some drainage functions. Improved airflow inside helmets could mitigate fluid pooling. Cognitive behavioral tools and virtual support systems are being tested to help astronauts process emotion in healthy, private ways. New suit designs may include interior absorbent materials in visors or modular tear channels. But more than tools, what astronauts ask for is emotional permission. The freedom to feel in an environment where everything, even grief, becomes procedural. Future missions may be longer. Crews will miss birthdays, funerals, births. They will look at Earth not as a landscape out a window, but as a memory glowing in the distance. And when they cry, and they will, those tears may float, but they'll mean the same thing. One astronaut wrote in their post-mission journal, "I cried once up there. It stung. It blurred everything. I had to pretend it wasn't happening. But that one tear, it floated in front of me like a pearl, just hanging in the air. It reminded me I was still human." Perhaps that's the final message of space tears, that even when you leave everything behind, something in you stays anchored. Your tears may not fall, but your heart still remembers the direction they used to go. You've made it through the silent trials of space, and maybe through sleep itself. Whether you're still listening or already adrift, I hope this cosmic journey gave you something. Wonder, stillness, maybe even peace. In the vacuum of space, the body changes. But here, you're safe. Let the stars keep you company and the darkness hold you gently. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams always have gravity.